It's such a pleasure to have you all here at the National Humanities Center. It's been a pleasure to work with Ranji and with her team as well, particularly Chris Chia, who's been very instrumental. Our staff has really enjoyed this partnership, and we look forward to, as Ranji said, we have a history of partnerships, and we look forward to continue many, many more. A large number of our staff is here. Matthew Booker, our Vice President for Scholarly Programs, is going to be monitoring the chat from those who are attending virtually. I apologize that our staff member who controls the weather is on vacation this week. So we've had heat waves, but we hope that she'll be here next week and it'll be nice again. As Ranji said, the center opened its doors in 1978. This is, for its time, and I think still in the present, just an incredibly innovative building. It really was designed to let the outdoors in and the indoors out and have a kind of symbiosis. We are set in the woods here. As Ranji indicated, the Research Triangle Park was established in the 50s and the 60s largely. It was a reaction to the fact that the economy of North Carolina was pretty much predicated on tobacco and textiles and furniture making, and all those were going into decline. So it was an attempt to reorient the economy completely around knowledge production and technology, et cetera. And this is the largest research park in the country, the Research Triangle Park. And there are lots and lots of pharmaceutical firms that have offices here, as well as various other entities. But the creators of the park saw fit, as Ranji indicated, to do something for the proximity of three major research universities and create an entity that was not necessarily dedicated solely to economic production. And the scholars who were on a kind of sabbatical year at Casbus, who referred to themselves as the lace curtain humanists at Casbus and Stanford, the kind of token humanists that year, emerged from their sabbatical at Casbus and began to agitate for the creation of a national center for the humanities dedicated exclusively for advanced research of the humanities as a kind of parallel to Casbus and also the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, which is, of course, largely built around math and science. And here we are. Every year between July and early October, around 600 to 700 people from around the world submit proposals to be a fellow here. We go through a very, very rigorous process, and ultimately we select around 35 fellows from that group to be fellows here for what is a year of intellectual ecstasy. And I can say it no differently. We require nothing of our scholars except that they focus entirely on their work, that they recuse themselves from committee work at their universities. They do not have any teaching responsibilities. We have numerous events going on, but they're all completely voluntary. The only thing that we require of our scholars is that they all have lunch together here in the Teachers' Commons. And through that process, a number of serendipitous, symbiotic conversations take place where a literary historian is talking to an art historian is talking to a philosopher, and the projects that they came here to do require a depth and a breadth that they normally would not have. And we have numerous testimonies to that. Of the roughly 1,400 scholars we've had here in our 43 years, they've produced roughly 1,600 books. If you wander around here, this is the Goheen collection. It goes all the way around. These are all the books that have been produced by scholars here. They've won Pulitzer Prizes, National Book Awards, Bancroft Awards, all the major awards in the disciplines. So those of you that are interested, our portal for application opens up about mid-July, and the deadline is roughly end of first week in October. In addition to the core program, the fellowship program, we have an incredibly robust and innovative education program. Roughly 2 to 3 million K through 12 collegiate and community college teachers access our materials online during the course of the year. Those materials range from webinars, roughly 20 to 30 webinars every year, which are largely conducted by former fellows, curricular materials, a number of different platforms. We do a number of institutes and gatherings during the course of the year. We do a lot of programming during the summer. We do a teaching and learning institute for PhD students in the humanities across the country because they are not trained to teach in their PhD programs, so we provide them with the apparatus to do so. We are this year doing a course, we're creating a program with 15 universities and representatives there through a gift from Google, where they will be creating curriculum and responsible artificial intelligence across the country. So we're going to innovate there as well. We're also working with Prairie View A&M as a segue to our HBCU program that we've been doing here to work with K through 12 teachers across the country on curriculum for African American studies. There are a number of different institutes that education is running, and everything is vetted through conjunction with our scholarly programs and our former fellows. So there's an online scholarly credibility that's lacking in most online education programs. So it's a very, very robust and innovative program. We'll talk more in the course of our conversation about the public engagement aspect of our mission, which has sort of gone full throttle in the past half dozen years here. And it is very much integrated with the scholarly mission and the education programs as well. So we do a number of different things, from the normal sort of scholar to scholar talks, various podcasts, virtual book clubs based on former fellows' work. When they publish a new book, we try to do a virtual book club. We've had, over the past couple of years, stemming from the pandemic, a pandemic oral history project, where we've been taking oral histories of frontline pandemic workers, from custodial staff to ambulance drivers to nurses to doctors, and all different levels. Everything that we do is keyword searchable and meta tagged to be keyword searchable. So very, very good archives for pedagogical material as well. And we've been doing major international conferences, particularly taking advantage of what's happened in the pandemic and moving to virtual environments, so that we typically, in our last conference, which was on healthcare a couple of months ago, we had 26 countries participating. The previous year, we did something on the humanities and artificial intelligence, and the year before that, we did the humanities and climate change. So we're working on grand challenges and trying to use the bully pulpit of the National Humanities Center to demonstrate how the humanities plays a key intervention in these grand challenges and needs to be better supported, and also to try to offset all the myopic, nefarious information about the humanities that is out there. So that's kind of a brief overview. And let me segue from that to introducing our very, very distinguished panel today. I'm going to proceed alphabetically and then sort of set the frame for what the discussion might look like, which hopefully will involve your questions as well. So, Nicholas Allen is director of the Jane and Harry Willson Center for Humanities and Arts at the University of Georgia, where he also holds an endowed professorship in the humanities. He was previously director of the Moore Institute for Research in the Humanities and Social Studies at the National University of Ireland in Galway. A scholar of Irish literature and culture by training, Nicholas received his BA in English literature from Queen's University in Belfast and his PhD from the School of English at Trinity College in Dublin. He's the author of 3 books, including most recently Ireland Literature and the Coast, Sea Fangled, published by Oxford University Press in 2020. He's also edited or co-edited 6 other volumes, including Archipelagio, a Reader, which is just an amazing collection of readings, which I've delved into deeply. It was published by Lilliput Press last year. And Nicholas's scholarship has been recognized with a variety of awards and supported by fellowships from the Mellon Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Irish Research Council. Joe Fox is Vice Chancellor of Research and Public Engagement and Dean of the School of Advanced Study, and was previously Director of the Institute for Humanities Research at the University of London. Joe is the UK's foremost scholar of propaganda and psychological warfare, specializing in their uses in 20th century Europe. She's the author of 2 monographs on these subjects, Filming Women in the Third Reich and Film Propaganda in Britain and Nazi Germany, World War II Cinema, and is currently working on a history of rumor in the Second World War, as well as a major project on rumor and politics in England from 1500 to the present with her colleague David Coast. Joe's a regular commentator in historical and contemporary disinformation campaigns, fake news, and also regularly assists museums and archives in their public programs and exhibitions. She's previously served as the Honorary Communications Director of the Royal Historical Society, and she is a National Teaching Fellow, a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts. And Jennifer Ho is the Director of the Center for the Humanities and the Arts at the University of Colorado-Boulder, where she's also professor of the in the Ethnic Studies Department. Jennifer is a member of the advisory boards of the Consortium for Humanities Centers and Institutes, and Kundiman, an Asian American literature nonprofit, and is the immediate past president of the Association for Asian American Studies. She's the author of 3 scholarly monographs, Consumption and Identity in Asian American Coming-of-Age Novels, Racial Ambiguity in Asian American Culture, which won the South Atlantic Modern Language Association Award for Best Monograph, and Understanding Jishjian. She has also co-edited 2 collections of essays, Narrative, Race, and Ethnicity in the United States, and Teaching Approaches to Asian North American Literature, along with numerous articles in journals such as Modern Fiction Studies, Journal for Asian American Studies, Amerasia Journal, the Global South, Southern Cultures, Japan Forum, and Oxford American. So please welcome our panel. So we're going to proceed relatively organically. Essentially, the way that we've agreed to kind of structure this is we're going to talk about initially, the 4 of us, where we are and what we've learned over the past couple of years. And then we're going to segue to talking about the changes that we have made and also the changes that we would like to see made. And we're going to interrogate each other during the course of this question and conversation. I don't mean that negatively, it's going to be a constructive interrogation. And then we're going to open things up to taking questions from the chat that Matthew's monitoring, and also questions from the audience, and have a conversation with you as well. So I am going to ask the first question, which is very broadly, where are you now, and what has changed in the past 2 years, and how has it helped or hindered your focus on public engagement? And I'll just start things off by asking Jennifer to begin, and then we can kind of go around.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, great. Actually, let me just move this up. So I would say I took on the role of directing the CHA and moving from North Carolina, which I was here for 17 years, to Boulder, Colorado. And then 6 months later, the global pandemic hit. So, you know, trying to navigate a new center for me, being a faculty member, trying to get used to culture, like that was all extraordinarily challenging during the pandemic. But I would say that the thing that has probably most changed for me in the last 2 years is that my director of finance and operation left at the end of February, and my events and communication person left at the end of March. So I have had and I only have 2 full-time staff at my center. And so I don't want to just say like, woe is me. What I guess I'm trying to say is that I think I have such a deep appreciation for staff. And I think that is something that we oftentimes neglect in so many different ways. So I think sometimes I literally texted my ex, and I'm still, because we're friends, my ex director of operations and finance, and said, Sharon, if I did not appropriately tell you how much I appreciate that you did, let me just take that time now to say, because I can't send out an email to the listserv, right? Like, I don't know, right? Like, there is so much I don't know how to do, which means trying to do public engagement, like everything is frozen now. And I also think that we sometimes forget that, when we talk about life in universities and colleges, we tend to think about students and faculty. And again, staff are a neglected part of who our constituent base should be. And that is also something that I've tried to really think through as a center director in terms of thinking about public engagement. Like, of course, I want to engage the larger beyond Boulder community, but the people who work in our universities, which include staff, faculty, and students, are also part of the community. And so I think that trying to think that there is some kind of great divide between those outside and those inside. One of the things that I'm trying to do is really demonstrate the porousness that when we talk about, the public, that the public is much broader. And I also, because Caleb's, sitting right in front of me, I want to really give a shout out to Caleb and the work that he's doing at Grinnell. And I think we should, I definitely think there should be a conversation among all of us, because part of what, I'm going to probably botch this, Caleb, but part of what Caleb's doing at his center, involves alumni and involves rethinking, whose names do we see on buildings, and inviting the public in, which include former students, to contribute to a reimagining of space and who is privileged. So I'll just end things there.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be with you and to see you all again. So many friends who I haven't seen for a while, which makes me think that after a period of long, slow time, I'm really struck in emerging out of that how little time we have and how fast things move. I have accidentally ended up being one of the longer serving directors at the Humanities Center and Institute. It's really come home to me after these last 2 years away. And it strikes me that we continue to have so many familiar conversations and the context have completely changed. I really feel that the old words and words that I used and words that I learned to use about the public, about engagement, about communities, about inclusion, about conversation, about change, they don't quite move people in the way that they used to. And so I feel that a new language and a new practice is beginning to emerge. But I feel confidence about that. I was really struck in the Public Humanities Network about people saying what they couldn't do. And it made me think that that wasn't a failure. It actually showed how much they had done and the way in which they had already themselves moved to a kind of frontier of experience and knowledge, that if we could only share that and find mechanisms to share it, to help it grow and evolve, and to think a little bit about what we'd like to be 5 years from now, not what our institutions would like to be. I've given up now in the center saying what you could do for the University of Georgia, but who would you like to be in 5 years? What way would you like to think? What kind of community would you like to be a part of? And I think I'd love to find mechanisms within an organization like ours now here today, where we have people with so many different trajectories, so many different understandings and ambitions. How could we network those things together? How could we create a different future for ourselves, for our universities, for our centers? But as a kind of joyfulness that I know Teresa was talking about yesterday, to bring back a sense of pleasure and being and presence in the kind of work that we do, rather than the work that we feel we're doing always for someone else. So in that sense, I wanted to celebrate the fact that you're all here this morning, that you have continued, that you've persevered, that I know you all carry weight, but that perhaps in the future there might be a kind of weightlessness that we could find in a new gravity that recognizes climate change, recognizes social injustice, recognizes all the pressures that we work under in private and public institutions, but through which there might still be a kind of freedom that is before us.
Well, I'm a new entrant into these fields, and I became Dean of the School of Advanced Study in January 2020. So just before everything went up in the air. What has struck me the most and the most profoundly about being in this role is the urgency of advocacy for the humanities. We are at a critical moment. it's not that what we do doesn't matter. It clearly does. It's that we need to communicate it differently, positively and confidently. Everything we need is there. It's all there. We do it all the time. And we have plenty of evidence here in this room across the world. Whether we're talking about the issues that Nicholas has just identified, net zero, climate change, social justice, well-being, mental health, we are at the cutting edge of it. Bizarrely, for people who do narrative incredibly well, we don't tell our story that well ourselves. So the transformative effects that we have in what we do day to day, the contribution we make to society and to knowledge, we must surface it, and we must surface it now. And I see part of my role, we're funded by government to raise the profile of the humanities in the UK and advocate for it. We must speak together, and we must speak with science, we must speak cross-sector, and we have to mobilize everything we have. And this requires national and international coordination. So I think this is the big challenge for me, whether it's the next generation of scholars who are going to come behind us and carry this into the future. We're at a critical moment, and I see this as my most urgent task.
Let me just echo a little bit of what's been said already. First of all, I think this is a dire moment, but it's also a celebratory moment, as Nicholas indicates. And I think part of the issue with many of us in the humanities is that we've been incredibly reactive rather than proactive. And we have a lot to celebrate, and we have a lot to be proactive about. We are really at a crossroads in a number of respects. And, I'm struck, for example, by the erosion of democracy across the world and in our own country, and how democracy is fundamentally undergirded by the principles of the humanities. And that needs to be more precisely and better communicated than it has been in the past. I'm also struck just having read a recent article in the New Yorker by Andrew Solomon about teenage and child suicide, which was just absolutely frightening in terms of that kind of degree of hopelessness that pervades many young people today. But then again, what we see is an enormous amount of energy in so many young people that we want to capitalize on. And we want to bring them into our communities and listen and have them take leadership roles in what we're doing as well. What we, as I've indicated previously, try to attempt to do here in many of our public engagement activities is not just to preach to the choir, not just to talk to the usual suspects, but to broaden our approach and to be more and more inclusive of kind of, I guess I would say, sort of an NPR type public, and even more broadly, broader than that. In my very first year here, before the pandemic, I made it a point to speak at every independent bookstore in North Carolina and to participate in town halls, and to do that increasingly across the country, and then sort of the pandemic sort of shut all of that down. But as I mentioned previously, the pandemic also gave us an opportunity to move virtually and to bring in a more global audience, and to also bring in people from adjacent disciplines to address these grand challenges of the day. And we have to articulate and underscore, I think, better than we have been, the significant primary role that the humanities plays in addressing things like climate change, immigration policy, racial injustice, et cetera.
Well, I'm thinking just about this question of communication, and some of you may agree and some of you may disagree, but it is a trope that we say, or that people say, that we don't communicate very well or positively about what we do. And I'm actually not sure that that's entirely true. Or at least it's only true to the degree to which we are speaking to and through infrastructures that are designed to exclude and minimalize the kinds of things that we express. And so in a sense, it's not really always just a question of us articulating better or differently that which we do. But it is also, and I think this is again perhaps where my interest in the public humanities is, and where I'm sometimes puzzled by this question, is there a division between practicality and the theoretical approach to things. But it's in the making and the doing of things that the signification comes. And in the making and the doing of things, you're making alternate futures and realities than the ones which you've been given. And that's slightly different, I think, than saying this is what the humanities do or this is what the humanities can add. Because one thing I've really learned in working with different kinds of communities and different kinds of constituencies is that it changes the fundamental nature of the research that you're making. It's not the same as what you used to make. It's a different thing. It's distributed differently and expressed differently. And I wonder how that would change our idea of how we communicate and what the utility of these things are to infrastructures that are designed to exclude them anyway.
Yeah, I'd just like to come back on that, because one of the things is that whatever we're doing now, and I'm just talking about the UK context now, and it may be different here, but whatever we're doing now isn't working. I put on the radio this morning, I listened to the Today program. We're talking about Horizon and our affiliation to the European funding programs. The entire conversation was dominated by science and by STEM. Horizon is just as critical to the humanities, and the research that funds is just as critical to our common knowledge. And my sense is we may be talking, but it's not landing where it needs to land. And my concern is that publicly funded programs of research for the humanities will increasingly get crowded out. And I think it is up to us to make sure that however we're communicating, when we speak about science, we hear humanities with it. And I just don't feel that in the UK that is happening. In fact, it's declining. It's going to affect our student numbers, because students will be thinking, why go to study the humanities when I could go into STEM or science or technology? We are just as important to these grand challenges. And I just don't think that whatever we've been doing in the UK has worked. And I'm worried that if we continue to do what we're doing, the problem will get worse. That makes me anxious.
So as a collective, how could something like the CHCI help you in the UK?
Well, I think we've got to help ourselves first and foremost. We've got to bring ourselves together across the UK to address what is going on locally, to make sure that we're talking to the politicians, to the government, the funders, to make sure that we are not preaching, but surfacing what is already there and just showing what we do. There are some amazing stories across the UK of humanities researchers that are making profound differences in their communities, nationally, globally. And I think just telling those stories, just showing, not preaching, showing, will make a huge difference. And we've brought together a group across the UK. It ranges from scholars to the BBC, to business leaders, to industry, to tech, to think about how we're going to do that collectively. There's a will, so we think there's got to be a way.
You know, I agree with what you're saying. I don't know the UK context, but I kind of want to echo what Nicholas is saying, because we do know how to communicate in various formats. And there are plenty of stories out there. But I'm thinking about vaccine hesitancy. That is very profound in the United States, and that is connected to politics, but vaccine hesitancy can be found around the world. And public health officials and medical health officials and scientists have been trying to message out as clearly as possible, if you take a vaccine, whether that be for COVID or whether that be for, a number of diseases that can be, helped to eradicate through vaccines, that will help. And yet there is still, and you study this, Joe, right? There's still vaccine hesitancy, there's vaccine deniers, there's conspiracy theories about all of this. I guess part of what I'm wondering is there is something about about how we're communicating, right? Not just what we're communicating, but how people are consuming through social media, through echo chambers. And I guess I'm going to say something really controversial, which is, while I admire and respect all forms of humanities scholarship, I think that I don't think it's useful for us to say that, and I'll just use myself, my monograph on racial ambiguity, which did win an award, and I'm really proud of it. Who cares? Like, seriously, like, who cares? No one's gonna read, like, maybe some of you have read it, which is fantastic, but the vast majority of the public is not reading my monograph. I wrote an opinion piece for CNN that I don't know, because I haven't tracked, but my guess is that far more, exponentially, probably by the thousands more people have read a CNN opinion piece that I wrote after the Atlanta spa shootings than will ever pick up racial ambiguity. And that is completely fine. I think that I engaged intellectually with both pieces. I think by genre, they're very different. But I think—
Hi, good morning.
I'm fooling myself thinking that it makes, right, that the book is somehow going to critically intervene in a way that a shorter, more public-facing piece. And I'm also gonna say, anyway, I'll stop.
So I think I want to comment on that, because I don't think it's an either-or situation at all. I mean, I think the work that we do as scholars is incredibly important to our disciplines, and to also sort of broadening those disciplines and to creating new disciplines and to interdisciplinary activity. So we should not discount that. So increasingly, the fellowship applications that we get here are more and more interdisciplinary, dealing with contemporary issues, racial injustice, what have you. But we pride ourselves in also being a place where somebody who's working on 8th century Persian numismatics can come and work on that book. And it's important, and it stretches the field, and as long as it's excellent stuff. So I think that's quite important. But what Joe is talking about in terms of using the platforms, communication platforms that are available to us in much more strategic ways, I think that's extremely important, and also directly countering so much of the misinformation that's out there. So just quickly, we, a few years ago, hired a full-time social media person. And her task is just push things out, elevate our profile, but also push out the newsworthy stories that elevate humanities advocacy. And, and we also have moved to doing a lot of podcasting. So we bring in graduate students from the surrounding universities, and they kind of repurpose, since we archive and meta tag everything that we're doing, they repurpose the things that we're doing in major conferences, create little podcasts out of them. We do lots of podcasting institutes to help train faculty how they can do better podcasting of their work. I guess what I'm saying is, in addition to being scholars, increasingly, I think it's important that we also have a public advocacy role, as all faculty members should have. And that's what gets into issues about reward structures, about promotion and tenure requirements, which need to be drastically re-examined. So it includes those kinds of things. The one other pitch I'll kind of make is, in terms of directly trying to counter misinformation, we created a site called Humanities in Action. And what Humanities in Action tries to do is put humanities perspectives on some crucial contemporary issues as they emerge, and gather in a somewhat nonpartisan way, I say somewhat nonpartisan way, responses, good credible responses. So it becomes a repository of good information that people can go to over the George Floyd killing or whatever it happens to be. We also have in there the elevator speeches for the general public, countering the economic misalignment, the negative economic arguments about the humanities and humanities graduates, which are completely wrong. And all that stuff is there in a nice little elevator speech that people can go to. The more that we can work together to create and communicate these kinds of things, I think the more successful we'll be.
Can I just very briefly, I think part for me, the conversation, and I agree with all the things that you say, is about the difference between a culture of deficit and a culture of futurity. Because even when you speak about working with scientists, actually the Center for Disease Control in the US just had a great competition, and it was used to arts to increase, or to decrease vaccine hesitancy. We have one of those grants, and a TikTok competition was held in the University of Georgia with a TikTok hashtag. I know nothing about TikTok, but there were over 100,000 people looked at it, engaged with it, created hundreds of TikToks. They then became a mural. The mural is being painted in one of the local public high schools. And, so there is a kind of afterlife, but I really think also, so part of this conversation is actually these conversations with scientists happen all the time and in many ways. So capturing it, as you say, is absolutely important.
Yeah.
But also integrating the practice of other languages, of the arts into what we do. I'm lucky, I'm in a Humanities and Arts Center. It leads to many different kinds of complex and layered conversations, but using sonic signatures, using the visual arts, using different means of communications in the making of what we do and the changing of what we do seems critical going forward too.
Could I just come back on that? On the podcasting, one of the things that we've done is get other people to speak about the humanities. And we've got a series called Change Makers. So rather than the scholars speaking about the humanities, we got individuals, some prominent people, to speak about humanities issues. So we got Gordon Brown to kick us off. We had social activists, we had newspaper editors. It was quite people from the world of tech talking about, we had a theme, how the pandemic has changed us, and we got them to comment on that. That's a very humanities theme, it's a very human issue. So getting others to speak with us is really important. I think one of the answers to this is public humanities and engagement work. And I just wanted to mention something that I think is very special, which is we have a Being Human festival. It is something we run, but the work is not ours. It is absolutely everyone else's across the UK. We operate in 51 towns and cities across the UK with 320 cultural partners. We reach huge numbers of people, and it's all driven by people, by researchers working with communities. It's a kind of model of citizen science and citizen involvement. And what I love about it is it tells our story through a sort of creative explosion across 2 weeks. And it's really dynamic. We had a pop-up at COP26. There was a cook-along, a virtual cook-along, people cooking Roman recipes. There was a green gaming hackathon. I mean, these kinds of things, getting people really involved. I think that's part of the communications issue. And that's, really what public engagement, public humanities can do in a very proactive, exciting way. And I think that's key to it, that involvement. But I'm not entirely sure we've cracked what citizen science co-production really means for the humanities, and that it's been translated across everything that we do, rewarded within our systems and acknowledged through promotion, reward, and also making sure that those we work with are duly acknowledged, reward, and paid for the kinds of labor that they put in.
Go ahead. We have lots of questions here.
Well, one thing I'm always struck also in these conversations, I'd love to hear from you, are your experiences. I mean, one thing, I suppose the reason why I was also asking you, how could an organization like the CHCI help the UK? I mean, there is definitely, and I feel this in different ways coming from Europe, from Ireland, having grown up in Belfast in a very fragmented and broken way, and then coming to the US. And I think about public engagement in a certain kind of way that may or may not be typical. But I know that for other people in the audience here, the idea of the public humanities is not something that excites them, or it's something that doesn't need to have that label because it's what they do already. Or maybe the relationship between faculty, administration, students, and communities is entirely different in these places. And one thing I've always wanted to have, and I'd love to have your instruction in this, is a sense in which those other experiences could feed back through the CHCI into the practices that we have in Georgia and change them, that we would learn from other people's experiences in completely different places. I mean, I had a sense of that when we went to the meeting in South Africa in Cape Town, and the art installation downstairs, which had so many echoes for me that I hadn't expected, of another continent very far away. And these experiences are not the same, but they have echoes. And the older I get, the more I think the world is a place made of echoes. And this is one of the great echo chambers that we sit in now. So, ways to capture those parts of people's experience, to align them, to amplify them, and then to change the voices that are at the table. And, I'd love to talk with you also about how students are involved in this work. My other experience of coming out of the pandemic is that, in fact, the most radical intervention can be made by the students. They have a different kind of license in the institution that I work in. They have a different context, they have a different experience. And I was really struck at the end of my class this spring about the weight they've been carrying. I think that's why I keep coming back to that word. Things that I never expected they were thinking or that they had in their minds while they were reading these weird books about Ireland. And so, you know, just finding ways even to give voice to that, I think could be the beginning of a different phase of energy and engagement and transformation. And if that is true, then we really do need to think differently about how we meet, how they meet with us, what we do when we meet together. And again, where would we all like to be in 5 or 10 years from now?
So I think one of the things that we have in common as people who lead and work in humanities and humanities centers and like Nicholas, I'm in an Arts and Humanities Center, is that we're not just siloed in a single department. And that means that there's a lot of great opportunity that we have on our campuses and in the community. And we can talk about community being the local geographic community, the community of alums, the community writ large around the globe. I think the other thing is that I'm able to pivot in a way that I think I couldn't in a department. And one of the things that I've tried to do and to think about related to my center is the ways that we can respond to the crises as they are happening. And so one of the things that I did when COVID-19 came around is tried to think of what kind of events and programmings could I do through Zoom, online. And I had immediately, like in the spring of 2020, started to have like a virtual book club and to collaborate with other centers. And people were writing to me saying like, thank you. You know, they just appreciated that we were trying to do something. The other thing is that we have in Boulder, unfortunately, had a series of tragedies. So there was a Boulder shooting that happened in March 22nd, 2021. There was the Marshall fires that decimated our community just at the beginning of the 2022 year. And my center, you know, actually, and big shout out to the Willson Center and to Nicholas, you know, I just steal ideas. I try and give attribution and not plagiarize, but I just steal ideas from more brilliant people than me.
I'm not going to say who I steal it from.
And, you know, we created a series of arts and humanities grants to give out to the larger community in response to these various tragedies. The Buffalo shooting that just happened, no one in my university, I don't know if this is true for other people in the United States, no one in my university has yet come out and said anything, and people are, you know, and people are noticing. And while we can argue, and I would be one of these people that would argue that statements, you know, don't really have any teeth and they can feel very much like they're cliches or platitudes, I think that they signal to, you know, definitely in the case of the Buffalo shooting, they signal to Black community members, Black students, Black faculty and staff, and at Boulder, this is a very significant issue because our numbers are so low, that someone is paying attention. And so I decided not to do this by committee. I just wrote a very short, simple statement saying, here I am writing yet again another statement. And I'm, you know, and I don't have anything original to say, right? I really don't at this point. I have nothing original to say about mass shootings and anti-Black racism. So go to Right to Be, take a bystander training, and like really stop and think about what you can do to end white supremacy and to end racism. And I do think that these are things that we can do as center directors to then model out to the greater community.
I think it might be useful now to kind of open things up to audience questions.
Well, thanks so much to the panelists. It's really helpful to hear some of the specific strategies and ideas that you have employed. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking about this term advocacy that has, it's never not been contentious, advocating for what? And it has become, I think, more challenging recently to advocate for things that are inclusive and socially just, and that particularly try to engage with the interests of any range of populations that have been targeted unfairly to be marginalized or excluded. And I'm thinking, for example, what several states have done to target what's called critical race theory, which is not a precise application, but that is really used to target attempts to teach about structural inequality. And so that certainly is about race, but also even can be applied to other things. And then the shifting in the political climate where increasingly, I think our administrations at academic institutions are going to be under increasing pressure either to not protect the ability of people to teach about these things. So that's already, and I'm in Virginia right now, and so that has already been devastating for our K-12 system. And it is also given license to particular interest groups on campus to target faculty members who are teaching this material. I think you get the point. In France, particularly, there's been an effort to try to target this as well, even calling it an expression of Americanism, even though this is much bigger than the United States. But I'm wondering if you can speak to, and I don't want to get in the weeds of, oh my goodness, how bad things are. I'm more interested in some positive strategies that you have either seen or heard about, or that we might think together with as people who are administering these institutes and centers. Where I was in a conversation with one of our colleagues the other day from ACLS, where you end up, of course, there's going to be a position on something. I don't think we should ever reach a point where we want to hear all sides about anti-Semitism. We want to value all perspectives. And I don't think we should ever reach the point where we want to hear the case for why the human trafficking in millions of Africans was actually a good thing. And maybe we should bring it back. But rather we have to take a normative stance on things. And that is actually not possible to, you get the point, right? So anyhow, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. Thank you very much.
I don't have an answer, but I have a question. And is the CHCI, are we as a collective interested in thinking about what answers to that question might be over the next 24 to 48 months? And is the CHCI the kind of organization that could come to a statement or a position such as you suggest? Because one thing I've noticed being in a major state university in a changing political context is that it's actually the verification of outside bodies that helps so much to keep a certain kind of oxygen, whether it was the Mellon Foundation, whether it's National Humanities Alliance to a lesser degree. But could the CHCI become the kind of place where when you have with the ACLS or the MLA and other bodies, that kind of verification from outside that your institution meets these kinds of standards? Is that a kind of oversight that we could collectively create together that might help people in states like ours where these changes are imminent and happening? And I think that that's a conversation that we could have. Maybe it's not, but I do think that with the weight of institutional knowledge and experience here and the connections, the National Humanities Alliance, the MLA, Association of American Studies, if all of these things were brought together and if they had some kind of certification or verification or statements that you had to adhere to be supported in that group, well then being excluded from that group would be a kind of negative commentary on the institution you worked on. So that's a thought.
I just want to echo what Nicholas is saying. I think that partnering with other, I love what you just said about oxygen. I think partnerships with other national, international entities could help because then, in some ways you get cover. So in other words, if you were going to collaborate with PEN America, and PEN America, by the way, if anyone specifically on the issue that Sylvester's just raising around bans on critical race theory, the profoundly horrific anti-LGBTQ plus policies that are coming through in various states and school boards, PEN America has really leading the charge in trying to shine a light on the book bans and the draconian measures that are happening. And I think they would probably, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with Jonathan Friedman, who is really kind of in charge of this kind of arm. I think they're looking for collaborators. I think they'd be very much interested in partnering with CHCI. And I think doing that through the auspices of having it be a CHCI, PEN America, I don't know the name of your center, Sylvester Center, could be really powerful, right? That gives you some cover from the forces that be who are going to claim that you are poisoning the minds, right, of the Virginia public. But I also think there's a lot of collective wisdom in this room, and I'm going to give a shout out to Max Orr, who really is the face of public humanities at UNC Chapel Hill. And I'm not trying to, discount all the other wonderful people from UNC who are doing public humanities, but he is the executive director at Carolina Public Humanities. And really, we should be asking Max about all of the things that we should be intervening in.
Can I just say something from the UK perspective? This is about to come to a head in the UK because we are facing national legislation on what is being called freedoms of speech in our universities. And these will have real implications for what happens on our campuses, including fines for institutions who are non-compliant. And it's going to go in the ways that you've just outlined. And we're going to find it incredibly difficult to think about how these freedom of speech legislation that will be policed effectively sits with our legislation around equalities, because these do not sit together, and it is something that the UK campuses are about to have to work through, how they're going to operate effectively in this environment. And I have to say that in the UK, I think it's also true here, we're operating in a highly charged political environment at which the humanities are at the center. And, we're often the subject of discussion when it comes to these kind of debates. So I think that the answer to this, we are going to have to nationally coordinate across all disciplines and across the humanities to think how we're going to navigate what are about to become incredibly choppy waters for what we do and what we say. I say this with some kind of surprise that I'm saying this about the UK, but this is about to hit UK universities in this parliament. It's slated as legislation for this parliament, so by 24 being enacted.
So I'd like to say that I think it's really important that the way we approach these questions and these issues constitutes a kind of sea change about how we've explained what the humanities are. When I used to do the convocation as dean for the College of Humanities, most of the students that were graduating realized that they were graduating with a major in English or philosophy or history, but they had no idea that they were part of a College of Humanities. And when you ask most people in the general public, oh, what are the humanities? They'll say, oh, it's English, it's history, it's philosophy, it's whatever. I think it's important that we stress how much the humanities are rooted in certain methodologies and processes. And those include things like questioning things. We don't believe in the status quo. That's why we're often bothersome. And that's a good thing. And how we sort of translate that as a good thing to opening up new venues and new perspectives. Also, I think a key aspect of the methodology that we use in the humanities is bridging disparate things, bringing them together in creative ways that are new, that we haven't thought about previously. And I guess the third thing I would emphasize is that we're great storytellers. And that's why our classes are the best classes that students take. And that's why our teachers are often the most transformative teachers, is because we can articulate and tell those stories and point them to stories that have deep resonance and transform their lives. So the more that we can sort of concentrate on process and methodology, I think the more successful we would be in translating our importance and our purpose to a broader public. Let me ask Matthew to see if there's anything from the Zoom, and then we'll go back to the audience.
There's only a comment from the Zoom, and the comment is, anything that is said in this room that is not said into this microphone is inaudible to the people who are on Zoom. So I desperately beg you to use this microphone if you have a question.
Okay.
All
right.
One very brief.
There was a question coming forward. Thank you.
I'll keep my mask on. Well, maybe I won't. Hello, good morning. Thank you so much for the engaging presentations and provocative conversation. I'm Pat Parker. I'm at UNC Chapel Hill, Director of the Institute for the Arts and Humanities. And so I don't have a question. I have a comment in response to some things that have been said. The first is in support of my colleague Max in terms of the urgency for engaging communities and engaging the expertise that's in our communities. I want to say that there is a long tradition of, well, not as long as some of the traditions in this room, but of community engagement scholarship that we can learn from. So we have that expertise, and on our campus, there is an infrastructure to support that. There's a Center for Public Service, which has been a leader in addressing some of the questions, for example, that you raised, Robert, about, how is this, our scholarship translatable to tenure and promotion committees, for example. So those are some of the questions, and people are working on that, and as a body, we should engage with that. Joe, you brought up something that I think is so important in terms of, I love this provocative question of how do we, what's the analog for the citizen scientist in the humanities? And I would say that in community engagement, there's already that sort of tradition of, so we go into communities, there's expertise in those communities, but we go in with an open mind, but we're not, we don't have an empty mind. We've got something to offer. And so I would suggest training, for example, some of the things that have done on our campus in archival research. There are all kinds of archives out there, and our community partners really want to have that expertise. And the other thing is, in my own research, just in terms of people who are already doing social justice activism, they need us as we have resources to help them. They don't need us to save them. They need us to support them. And so we can provide those kinds of resources. I have lots. Well, one last thing I'll say is all of this is conditioned on the building of trust. So typically when we've gone in universities, we've left our communities devastated, dead, enslaved, name your annihilation process. And so we've got to figure out how to build up trust in terms of engaging in those communities, because there is, in anthropology, there's something called a refusal. It's just refusing for people to come in to say, yes, let me survey you again. Yeah. So anyway, so I'll stop there. I wish I had a question, but anyway, maybe you can respond.
We love your comments.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I guess it is also a profound truth in that, which is that we all enter these kinds of positions or frequently because we are motivated, distinguished, excelled in some particular fields. But actually, the one thing I've learned from my own experience is just the degree to which it's deep social work. Social work, as you say, as a profession, has these kinds of skills that we try to learn from on our campus, but just even the organic social life of the center and the institute, the transparency and trustworthiness and encouragement with which you proceed over years, I think is the very capital of the project that you need to go forward. And if I was to learn anything from my past experience, it would be that. And so I very much appreciate your comments.
Can I just say that those comments are so well made, and that's exactly the site where we can really start to grow this activity. But I'll just talk about one issue around that, and that's trust and how long it takes to establish that trust. And that there's something actually, certainly in our work, one of the things that's kind of broken is that we don't get sustainable funding models to allow that trust to develop over a long period of time. So often engagement work, you get short injections of cash that come in and support a project, a pilot project, but then it's that sustainability. If you really want to build those relations and trust, we have to have a sustainable funding model for this kind of work that goes on beyond that initial engagement. And that's something that we're working on out of the Being Human Festival to work to put a national platform in place for the UK that doesn't just pump prime these initiatives and get them off the ground, but that sustains them for periods of time. And one of the key drivers of that is to establish long-term relationships and trust, and so that the money flows out into the community groups and sustains what they do. They're an absolutely critical part and an equal part of our research ecosystem in the humanities. And we must make sure that the money goes in there on a sustainable basis.
Thank you, everybody. And I very much appreciate the conversation about trust and community. I just wanted to share a small story from my experience. I'm James Miller. I'm one of the co-directors of the Humanities Research Center at Duke Kunshan University, which is Duke's joint venture university in China. And as you may know, in Chinese, there are no singulars and plurals. And so when I keep saying Humanities Research Center and the students come back to me, oh no, you're the Humanity Research Center. And it always irritates me. And I say, no, we're humanities. And then I began to think, well, maybe the students are right, right? And not humanity in the sense of the abstract noun referring to the human species, but the value of care. And I think if what we do in humanities is teach people how to care for other people, that's basically, you know, what we're doing. I think that's what our students so much want, you know, is care and to be cared for. And I think if that's part of our kind of central message to people, then I think the value of the humanities, which we always say, oh, it's like critical thinking, critic, but it's not just critic, it's care as well. And I think we've sort of overlooked or underemphasized that aspect of what we do in stories and literature and all of those other things. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, please. I'm sorry. Go ahead. And then we'll go over here.
Hi, I'm Anirban with the UC Humanities Research Institute, and I guess I'm kind of taking this opportunity to throw something that I've been grappling with out there as a provocation, largely from the last two questions too. I just kind of wanted to throw this out as a provocation. Well, not as a provocation, I hope, but as something I'm sort of grappling with myself. But especially around the kind of question of conspiracy theories, anti-vaxxers, etc. I wonder sometimes whether the humanities are a victim of their own success in a way that we don't quite grapple with, to the extent that a kind of general attitude of skepticism, questioning, hermeneutics of suspicion seems to actually be a part of the social fabric. And so I don't quite know what to do with that, other than I wonder whether we need to kind of specify the genres of argumentation and cultures of thinking that we want to support and proliferate, while recognizing that a lot of the things that we are uncomfortable with are also products of thought and reflection, just not the kinds we would like to go along with. So I just kind of wanted to table that as a...
We have a resident expert here who can speak.
Yeah, I've been working on this a little bit, and that was part of when the whole debate around conspiracy theories really took off in 2016. That was exactly some of the discussion that was going on around postmodernism, questioning of truth. It's all your fault, humanities, you know. But I think the one thing I would like to say about this is we are a large part of the solution. And I've been doing a project around anti-vaxxer rumors, and we've been attempting to do various things that have not worked, but it was worth doing, which is trying to train an algorithm to spot conspiracy theory. And we spent hours with massive bodies of data. But the thing that actually ended up being the most important finding was around the historical material. We went back to the 1500s and looked at what rumors and conspiracy theories had been in circulation around disease, pandemic, and vaccination as it moves into the 19th century. And we identified by a sort of taxonomy that all of the conspiracy theories and rumors, fake news, disinformation that was circulating in the past 2 years, all of it had a historical precedent. So we started to group it, and then we started to predict what was going to happen next. Where would the rumors go? Where would disinformation go after that? We were about 65% right. And so we started to work with government about how you anticipate or preempt what's going to happen next using historical data. I think we're part of the my position is that we're part of the solution to these things, and we can deploy our skills in all kinds of ways, whether that's how we work or the content or what we work with to help with these grand challenges. But you're absolutely right. Right at the beginning, 2016, there was quite a lot of debate about how the humanities had caused this problem. Postmodern, questioning of truth, it's on you. And there was a lot of commentary on it. I think we need to push into the space and talk about what we understand by truth, fact, and so on, and direct it to show how what we do responds to some of these big challenges on disinformation.
And you just made me think actually back to Sylvester's question, and then thinking about allegory and metaphor, and a wonderful satirical novel called Plague, set, I think, in the 15th century about a monk who has the plague, doesn't realize, and wonders why everybody is dying around him as he proceeds around rural England. And so in a sense, we come back to books and we come back to literature also as mechanisms whereby these conversations of skepticism are themselves undone by irony and satire. So there is also that historical context to the rise of the novel, and still the popularity of literariness in the culture to answer and undermine some of these propagandistic responses.
That's where our algorithm hit the rocks. It couldn't pick up satire. So close.
Many people can't.
One more question from the audience, and then I'd like to ask a concluding question of the panelists as we're running out of time.
Thanks. Jennifer Gunn, University of Minnesota. And of course, it's a comment, not a question. So I just want to absolutely reinforce what Max said about humanities that are already taking place in the community, and also to think about who we are trying to communicate with and how. So one of our fellows this year pointed out the problems with the National Public Radio approach to communication and not communicating through things that are better read in the Black community, et cetera. And that was actually, a very useful point in thinking about it, because it's very much also about legitimacy. And then the other thing that I wanted to say is we do a lousy job of defending our finances. So I totally believe in the sustainability issue. And there's two big issues. One is that we have to convince our universities that money must go out to the community and not just to academic partners at other institutions, or preferably not go out at all. And the second is that in the sciences, there's bridge funding between your big NIH grant or your NSF grant. And a lab has been built, it's expensive, and it's much cheaper for the university to maintain it. And guess what? It's our tuition revenue that sustains it. But we are lousy at researching that and documenting that. So thanks.
Absolutely. I would say that the reason many of those in science are teaching 0-1 and 1-1 loads is because they're supported by those of us in the humanities teaching 2-2 and 3-3 loads.
Could I just come back on that issue about sort of how we make a case for funding? This is a very live issue in the UK. It will be one here, but a lot of our money comes from public funding. And one of the things that we have discovered, well, we should have known it all along really, but one of the things that we've landed on is that we just do not know how to describe what humanities infrastructure is and looks like and how it should be funded and sustained. So with government agencies, Research England and our Arts and Humanities Research Council, we've been commissioned to build a map of UK humanities infrastructure to show where that infrastructure is, what it is, how it sustains our work in order to make a further case for funding for the continuation of humanities infrastructure. And that includes, and it comes back to why we're all here, centers, hubs, institutes, networks, that really diverse ecosystem. We need to map it, we need to capture it, we need to fund it. And so this is an important piece of work that we're doing. We hope that it will connect researchers, it will show hotspots and cold spots, but one of the drivers for that is to make sure that we are seen in the same way as that kind of science infrastructure, but in our terms.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to conclude with a question for the panelists. Let me preface this question by saying that you're probably familiar with the Heart of the Matter report, which was produced 10 years ago. It was requested by Congress of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and it was a report that had a sort of who's who group putting together a report about the importance of the humanities to a democratic society. And it's now been 10 years. And we at the National Humanities Center are going to work with the American Academy of Arts and Sciences next spring to do 2 symposia. One, a retrospective on the Heart of the Matter report, and we're going to focus on a look forward from that. So I'd like to use that as a segue to ask each of our panelists, what will our humanities centers and institutes look like a decade from now? What would you like them to look like a decade from now?
I'd like us not to think that we are approaching the tipping point where there's not going to be a future.
I'd like us 10 years from now to look back and think, weren't we great 10 years ago thinking about what this would look like 10 years from now?
I think I would like a vibrant center that includes all of those community groups that we've spoken about. They're interdisciplinary, it's cross-sector. Most importantly, I'd like it to be the place where science comes to us and that we're leading on those projects rather than being a second partner to them. It is the place where interdisciplinary research and knowledge and creation happens, and that the humanities are seen as world leaders in that conversation.
A great place to conclude. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Jennifer.